We have finally arrived. America's most famous horse race is all set for Saturday. Welcome to the Kentucky Derby preview show. 150th edition coming up this Saturday afternoon, where all eyes in the sports world will be centered under the twin spires of Churchill Downs to see who reigns supreme in the run for the roses in the first leg of the Triple Crown. Hello, everybody. I am Greg Wolf. Great to be with you. We'll go through the entire field fast as we can. All 20 runners coming up in the next 30 minutes on the show. I'll introduce my partners here in just a moment. First, let's take a look at the field that will line up on Saturday. We hope for good weather, 40% chance of rain, but it looks like just light showers and should get better as we move on into the afternoon. Was a late defection in this race. One of the three runners for trainer Brad Cox is out. That's Encino. He had a soft tissue injury, so he's gone for about 30 days. That allows Epic Ride to draw into the race. He'll be the first ever starter for trainer John Ennis. He'll get that outside post 20. Adam Beschizza will ride. With me, Acacia Clement, champion jockey Richard Migliori. A lot of great storylines in this race. The 2-year-old champ announced he is back. Fierceness, can he repeat that brilliant effort from the Florida Derby? And will Japan shine? They've shined on the international stage so far. Will they get their moment in Kentucky?
And they have two chances as well coming up with this Kentucky Derby 150. Obviously, Richie, the big kind of Japanese runner, it does seem, is Forever Young, who we saw winning the UAE Derby. But this is a horse who is undefeated, physically not the most imposing, and doesn't really do a ton in the mornings, but he has obviously a lot of ability.
Well, yeah, he's 5 for 5, and he was aided by the scratch of Encino. So instead of being the first horse loaded in the gate in the split, he's the last horse in the first split. And it takes a long time to load 20 horses. Less time in the gate, the better.
Got to start this story, though, with Fierceness. The 2-year-old champ was brilliant on Breeders' Cup weekend. It really stole the show that weekend, winning that Breeders' Cup Juvenile. Flopped a bit in that 3-year-old return, but then he came back even better, Acacia, in his final Derby prep.
He did a 110 Beyer speed figure for the Florida Derby, and he's a horse that hasn't shown as of yet that he can overcome adversity on the track. But one thing I like about this Florida Derby is that he wasn't necessarily the fastest out of the gate right away. He gradually moved up into position. Johnny Velasquez has such soft hands and put him into the perfect position. I think if he's able to get in a comfortable spot, he doesn't necessarily need to be on the lead. Now, he is always a brilliant workhorse. He's been training in company with Agate Road, his stablemate, who we'll see in the American turf, and he's never a great workhorse, Greg, but I loved the gallop out in particular for this, about 112 for the 6 furlongs in the way, putting in those miles so easily in the way that he was moving over the track.
Once Johnny Velasquez allowed him to do more, he readily picked up the bridle and did more. His 8th after the finish line was better than his 8th before the finish line when he was trying to, stay with his workmate a little bit. I think he's going to sit a good trip. He may not make the lead. I don't think he needs the lead. I just don't want to see him kind of buried in and amongst horses, and I think with his post that won't be the case.
Yeah, you're talking about he's now post 16 for him with a scratch in here. Does that allow him to stay out of trouble?
It could. I'm not too worried about the post for him. He's drawn outside the other speed. Dornoch has the rail, and Danny Gargan has said they're going. Track Phantom is a horse that's very quick early as well. And also with the starting gate, up until the last couple of years, it really did inhibit those horses that were stuck in that area with the auxiliary gate. Not such a conversation now with the one gate for the 20 horses.
Well, you could not have a bigger contrast in running style between your top two choices in this year's Kentucky Derby than Fierceness and Sierra Leone. Fierceness wants to be forward, if not on the front end. Sierra Leone is a deep closer trying to bring Chad Brown his first ever Kentucky Derby winner.
A $2.3 million son of gun runner, and I think he's the goods. I mean, he has been very impressive in his races so far. He is going to be a deep closing type, but he should have pace to run at in this Kentucky Derby. He was against the track in the Remsen, nearly got the job done where Dornoch had the flow of the race. And then Richie, in the way that he finished the Bluegrass, I thought was very impressive in that effort, and distance should not be a problem for him.
No, the distance is the last worry that I have for this horse. It's the traffic that he's going to have to navigate his way through. And that little bit of a habit of wanting to lug in a little bit in the stretch. You just don't want to have to correct the horse at a critical stage in the race.
And, we say Chad Brown, well, he's not won a Kentucky Derby. Good Magic, unfortunately, had to go up against a pretty good one in 2018 and wound up winning a Triple Crown.
And Zanda nearly got the job done a couple of years ago, too.
Third place finish, had the runner-up finish to a horse who won the Triple Crown. See what he can do this year. He's got another horse as well by the name of Domestic Product, and this is a horse who does have a finish ahead of Fierceness in the Holy Bull back in early February.
But I think his Tampa Bay Derby was really the one that was the most impressive, Richie. This was a race almost run like a turf race, and he was able to have that turn of foot, as we usually say with turf racing, in a very slow pace.
Very glacially slow pace, a half in 51. I like the way he had to muscle his way out there to secure running room. And that serves you well when you've got a horse that's brave and strong and that will make some room for himself in a 20-horse field. That is such a helpful thing for a rider to know that a horse has that ability.
Brad Ortiz Jr. will be on board Domestic Product. Two-team punch for Chad Brown, trying to get that first ever Kentucky Derby win. You can play the Derby and everything else beyond by getting signed up with NYRA Bets. $25 free bet in the Kentucky Derby with new members punching in that code right there, Derby25, at sign up, along with that $200 deposit match sign up bonus right there to play it all at NYRABets.com. Well, that trio has now become a duo, as we mentioned at the top of the show, for trainer Brad Cox. Let's start with Catching Freedom, his Louisiana Derby winner.
I really like this horse, Greg. I nearly picked him for this Kentucky Derby. I know he's another deep closer, and he did get a setup last time, but he has improved every single start, Richie. And the way that he finished up that last race, I was impressed by. Over Honor Marie and Flavien Prat staying aboard.
And I like that Flavien has experience with this horse now. Now he knows what kind of horse he is. And much like other Chad Brown runners that have shown that ability to close, they've run well in the Derby under Flavien. That horse was what, third?
Zandon.
Zandon, right? I mean, he's done really good work with these kind of horses. I think Catching Freedom's a major player, but another one that's got to navigate traffic.
Well, you get the lightly raced Just a Touch from the same barn as here. He's coming off a runner-up finish behind Sarah Leone. Horse Acacia, who can be forward, but he's giving up a lot of experience in this race.
He is. It's a bit of a concern for me, kind of going right into the deep end with only a maiden win to his name. That said, he ran very well in the Gotham. And he was kind of the last man standing in the Bluegrass last out, Richie.
He was, and only his third start. So that was a huge effort. He adds pace to this affair, and he's a horse that has a lot of upside because you got to think there's going to be improvement.
Well, it always seems like it's going to be a better Kentucky Derby when you got the big names and the big characters in the game, and none bigger than Dwayne Lucas, the coach, back this year, where it looked like for a time, mid to late 90s, he wasn't going to let anyone else win this race. He won 3 of them in 5 years, the last being Charismatic, who got into the last minute with that victory in the Lexington. He's going to try and win it again with a long shot this year, Just Steel. And this is a horse who was a sprint winner at the end of his 2-year-old campaign. But Dwayne, Maggie Wolfendale says he's gotten a lot bigger, stronger, more physical, and thinks more ground's probably going to be better for him.
I actually don't know how much bigger Just Steel can get, as he is pushing 17 hands. He's a big horse, and it's ironic that Wayne, the coach, the legend, says that, as he's a horse that in his last Churchill Downs outing won a stake going the 6.5 furlongs in the Ed Brown Memorial. But he has been well represented in his campaign in Arkansas over this winter, especially his second place effort last time to Muth, who we won't have to deal with in this Kentucky Derby. A wide trip throughout. Now he's drawn a little bit more inside in this 20-horse field in post position number 6. And I can't say I don't like him in here. It's funny looking at his pedigree. It's actually more of a turf pedigree, as Justify can certainly sire some grass runners, all turf on the bottom. And as I always say, horses that may prefer the turf, they do tend to like Churchill Downs, Greg.
Well, we were talking about Just a Touch and all that inexperience. No one comes in with more experience in this race than Just Steel.
That's right. Or Wayne Lucas, a horseman who has been there, done it all, and it's pretty cool with such an experienced horseman and a young rider, Richie, with Keith Asmussen. Of course, the son of Steve Asmussen has been riding down at Oaklawn, finishing second in the riding standings, and does have the opportunity now for his first Kentucky Derby starter.
I love it. He's earned that Kentucky Derby opportunity. And I love the rider change to Keith last time in the Arkansas Derby because he has very soft hands. It's one of his strengths as a rider, one of his greatest attributes. And I felt like Just Steel was pulling a little too much and wasn't settling enough. He settled well. He finished well. And I think all that foundation serves him well Saturday.
Well, he was no match for the horse we're going to talk about next, early on the Derby Trail in Hot Springs out at Oaklawn Park on that wet track in the Southwest. Mystic Dan crushed everybody that afternoon, and then he'd follow that up with a third-place finish behind Just Steel in the Arkansas Derby. But this race, Acacia, put this horse on the map.
It did. It was a 101 Beyer speed figure, but it's just so significantly faster than anything else that he has run. He's a bit of a tough read for me. Was it the wet track, Richie? Is that what elevated him? It's his only wet track as of yet. He was so impressive that day. He looked to me a little erratic in the stretch last time out, like he maybe wasn't traveling as smoothly as he could have been.
Yeah, I would agree with that assessment. I was taken with the Southwest. I just think they were experimenting. He has speed, trying to get him to use his speed differently, late instead of early. I think he's a player, and I think he's fallen off of everybody's radar. And he broke his maiden very impressively at Churchill Downs.
And we talk about a rider, too, that always has his horses in the perfect position. Brian Hernandez Jr. Will be aboard for Kenny McPeak. Meanwhile, Track Phantom, you talk about the pace in this year's Kentucky Derby. He is going to be part of it. He's always on the lead, and they're going to add blinkers for Saturday.
It is interesting with the equipment change. He set the pace pretty comfortably in the Louisiana Derby last time out, and you get a good look at a typical type of short blinker cup that Steve Asmussen does add to his runners in the way that he's been training, Richie. I would imagine to be able to hold on a little bit later. That speed is dangerous. He could have some company with this pace, though.
I think he's going to encounter faster paces than he's been recently, where he's been able to kind of get in a comfortable rhythm on the lead. I think if he's going to make the lead here, he's going to have to work for it. So I think he's got a kind of a tough road to hoe here.
Yeah, the 2-year-old champ, Dornock on the rail, a couple others that want to be part of that pace. We're going to talk through the rest of this field when we come back. His trainer has won all over the world on the international stage in big moments. Saudi Arabia, Australia, even the U.S. with a couple of Breeders' Cup wins. Can Japan get their first ever Derby winner? We'll be back.
Hi everyone, Matthew DeSantis here with NYRA Bets. And in addition to picking horses, I also am a college professor. So for the big races, I love to hit the whiteboard, and there's no bigger race than the Kentucky Derby. Let's talk about the early pace. The last couple of years, the pace has been diabolical, and I expect it to be strong again this year with as many as 5 horses contending for the early lead. From the inside rail, Dornock, just a touch, might have the best early speed of the group. Track Phantom getting the blinkers on will be intentional, as well as Fierceness and Epic Ride going to the front. The big X factor is the Japanese horse Tio Password, won his last race in Japan in gate-to-wire fashion, but the connections have said they might try to sit mid-pack. Here's an interesting note. Since 2000, only 2 gate-to-wire winners of Kentucky Derby, and 50% of winners have closed from more than 5 lengths off the pace. Certainly seems like it could sit up that way again this year. Make sure to get all of our Derby and Oaks coverage on NYRA Bets.
I think you want to add another one of that pace, too. One of the Japanese runners who we're going to talk about in a moment. Tio Password, 2 wins, undefeated, and he likes to be forward. You can bet $250 each on Belmont at the Big A and at Churchill Downs. And whether you win or lose, you get $50 in your account. A little bonus to get you ready for the Kentucky Derby. Opt in. Take advantage of that promotion at NYRABets.com. Let's start with the more highly regarded Japanese runner, and that is Forever Young and trainer Yoshito Yahagi. He has trained a Triple Crown winner. That was in Japan. Contrail, he's also won a couple of Breeders' Cup races with Love's Only You, Philly and Mare Turf, and March Lorraine in the Distaff.
A world-class horseman, indeed, and Forever Young, a horse that, as I said, not the most physically imposing, Richie. He's a little bit on the smaller side. I had the opportunity to watch him train pretty much every morning for about 2 weeks in Dubai ahead of the UAE Derby, and he was a lot more professional in the running of that race because we saw in Saudi how he didn't switch leads. He was able to do that last time, but his connections have said he's a horse that does not handle kickback well. He was always in the clear in the UAE Derby and will need to get a trip in the Kentucky Derby.
Hard to imagine, Greg, that he would get a trip where he's not going to have to deal with kickback at least for a decent portion of the race.
Yeah, his trainer was a little coy about it. He said, we've been working with trying to get him some dirt in his face. I'm not going to tell you how. You're going to have to wait and see on Saturday. He did admit, too, his horse came to Louisville a little bit tired. He's won already in 3 different countries, so they had to back off training on a little bit. So that's interesting to take into account. Meanwhile, his compatriot Patriot TO Password. This is a horse that does like to be forward. In one of his most recent works, Acacia, he outworked an older horse who we're going to see in the Alley Sheba.
Yeah, and going fast as well, working at Churchill Downs. If you watch that last race in Japan, it's actually going right-handed, so going the opposite direction of the race that he's going to be running in the Kentucky Derby, and he uses that speed to his advantage. He just holds on with a late closer coming at him, and he's only run twice.
He's only run twice, and they started him at 1 1/8. Both of his efforts at 1 mile and a furlong. And I don't know how to compare the kind of speed they're showing there going 1 mile and a furlong to the kind of speed you're going to see in the Kentucky Derby.
And in that second, they talk about lack of experience. He's the most inexperienced runner in the race. He barely hung on, even though he did in that last race that gets him into this Kentucky Derby. Out west, we don't have Bob Baffert this year, but we do have a horse who looked pretty impressive in the Santa Anita Derby. Let's talk about that Santa Anita Kentucky Derby double, the last to do it. A horse who'd go on to win the Triple Crown Justify, and before that, California Chrome, who was alive going into the Belmont to pull off a Triple Crown.
Big effort that day, and what a popular horse.
Well, this year's West Coast Santa Anita Derby winner, that is Stronghold. Maggie, how does this horse stack up against this year's field?
You know, it's always interesting to see and kind of where these West Coast horses land when facing these horses that have been prepping, and the majority of the preps at least this side of the Mississippi River. And with not Bob Baffert not in the conversation this year, I think a horse like Stronghold gets a little bit forgotten, but he was gritty in taking down the Santa Anita Derby over the favored Bob Baffert horse that day in Imagination. And I like this horse. Now, there's a question mark given his pedigree. He's a ghost sapper out of a Jimmy Creed mare. How far he ultimately wants to go. But I like his preparations leading into this. And furthermore, he does have experience over the local strip as he broke his maiden, defeating Resilience and Track Phantom at Churchill Downs in his second start. So he's the long shot, Greg, that I'm very intrigued by.
And he was outworking some older graded stakes winners as well, leading into that Santa Anita Derby with the first starter in the Run for the Roses for trainer Phil D'Amato, who year in and year out is atop those leaderboard standings out in Southern California. Preps are huge, and then we get into the workouts. Who's impressing everyone in the mornings leading up to this Run for the Roses? Who's impressed you most leading up to the big day?
Well, without the benefit of actually being on the grounds and being able to not only watch horses work, but listen to how they breathe, how they're hitting the ground, but watching on TV. Anna Marie is the horse that has really elevated in my eyes from his morning trials. He just seems to skip over this Churchill Downs surface. His record there, he kind of bears that out. He looks like a lighter framed type of individual, and you just don't see that kind of skip and bobble that you get from some of the horses working at Churchill Downs. More a function of the track being a cuppier kind of track, gets away from horse a little bit. He's just as smooth as can be and finishes well, and I think he is a player off of the way he has worked up to the race, Acacia.
And an exciting opportunity for trainer Whit Beckman. Has only been training for a short time, a former assistant to both Todd Pletcher and Chad Brown, and now having his big opportunity with a horse that's turned a lot of heads. And also the first opportunity in the Kentucky Derby for Ben Curtis, who on a whim decided to come and ride in America this year, and now running in the biggest race in the U.S., arguably biggest dirt race in particular. And Anna Marie, a horse that, as Richie said, one that really seems to be training well coming into this.
Yeah, by all reports, very laid-back horse. This is starting to be the buzz horse, the wise guy horse that everyone's attaching themselves to. Hall of Fame trainer Bill Mott, he does have a Kentucky Derby. It came via DQ with Country House a few years back. Resilience, his chance this year with the Wood Memorial winner, who is coming off that 2 1/4 length victory here on April 6th.
And the blinkers have really made a big difference. You could get a good shot of them there. I showed them, Richie, in comparison to what we see as a normal cheater cup. It's a significant size blinker that Bill Mott did add to keep Resilience from checking on other horses next to him in the stretch, and he really improved. He looks like a horse that should appreciate distance and could be peaking at the right time.
This was the exact desired effect you want, adding blinkers. You don't want to make a horse rank. You don't want to add speed, more speed to them. You want them to stay in the bit and have continuity to their run, and he looked like a winner every step of the way in the Wood Memorial because of that continuity.
Meanwhile, Society Man, 1 of 2 in the race for Danny Gargan. He actually went into the Withers as a maiden. He would wind up breaking his maiden next time out. Then he was 106 to 1 Acacia in the Wood Memorial where he was runner-up.
And look, he ran on. He was second best behind Resilience that day, but he did run on. Louis Rivera Jr. did everything right on him that day. Certainly understand going for an experienced jockey in the Kentucky Derby. Frankie Dettori going to climb aboard. Richie, a horse that will have to step forward, but we'll see if he's chasing down his stablemate Dornoch.
Speaking of Dornoch, he gets the rail. Brother to last year's Kentucky Derby winner Mage, and Danny Gargan has said, we're not going to mess around this time. He didn't like that kickback in the bluegrass. We want to be in front on the lead.
And the rail simplifies things. We're going. Throw down the gauntlet. We're going to try to take this gate to wire. Luis Saez, one of the best gate riders we have in North America, certainly not adverse to going to the lead. And Dornoch certainly lends itself to base. He's never run a bad race. Really, he's never run a bad race. And his ability to fight was so on display in the Remsen. He was passed by Sierra Leone, albeit only his second start, and fought back on the rail. You gotta like his determination.
Is he good enough against this group on his best, or does he need to take a big step forward?
I think he needs to take a step forward. I'm not necessarily in the camp going into the Kentucky Derby, but I do think that he has improved as we've gone along. He used to have the tendency to lug in, to not switch leads, and he has been more impressive and more consistent, more professional throughout his races. The full brother to last year's Derby winner, Mage, they look nothing alike, though.
We know long shots can win this race. You don't have to go that far back. Horse who got in at the very last minute. Rich Strike paid $163. Country House, who won via DQ for Mott, we talked about, paid a big price. Mind That Bird with that brilliant ride from Calvin Burrell. Well, we see another long shot get it this year. Saffie Joseph Jr. brings in a very lightly raced runner. This will be his 4th career start for Catalytic.
And a horse that started his career off sprinting. His only time going a distance of ground was last time in the Florida Derby. And Richie, you could see while Fierceness was traveling so easily, Catalytic had to be ridden to catch up to his competition. But he did hold on to finish second that day, Greg.
Meanwhile, Epic Ride, talked about earlier, draws into this race as an also eligible with the scratch of Encino. And his dirt debut, he'd ridden exclusively on synthetic. It came in the bluegrass and a pretty good showing, 3rd behind Sierra Leone.
That was a really good effort. He was stalking. I thought he got a good trip under Adam Beschitza, a rider that I've become a fan of as we had, covered Churchill. Consistently gives you a good, strong ride. He's got a lot of things against him, though, with that post. I mean, he's flush almost to the outside fence, even with the new starting gate. What kind of trip does he work out?
We have so many horses to get to in the race. We got to chop some of this out, so it's time to get to selections. I believe we're going to start with Maggie Wolfadell. Maggie, it is time. Where are you going to go in the Derby?
I'm going to take a strong stance against the favorite in here, Fierceness. He's a horse that has never ultimately impressed me physically, but the other favorite has, and that's Sierra Leone. And what we saw with Matthew DeSantis in the pace, I think he does get the right kind of setup, like the draw. I think this horse has a world of talent and has literally pretty much done nothing wrong in his entire career. Chad Brown gets his first Derby win.
Maggie, I'm with you. I ended up pulling the plug and going with Sierra Leone as well, though I do think Catching Freedom will come running late. Sierra Leone's been training so well throughout the winter at Payson Park, and a horse that has flourished coming into his 3-year-old season. And at $2.3 million, you would certainly hope, Richie, that he will be peaking at the right time.
Yeah, and if he works out a trip, he's got the closing kick. I'm going with your favorite, Fierceness. I just think that draw really benefits him. I don't think he needs the lead, but I think he'll be forward. He'll put himself up, stalking just from the outside. And much like Fierceness, I've never impressed anybody from a physical perspective either.
I'm in agreement with Mick here. I think we're seeing a superstar potentially in this race. Fierceness is just too good for this group on his best. His Florida Derby, just another level what we saw when everybody was talking about him from that win in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. Special horse who I think that post really helps him in post 16 now with a scratch where he won't have to encounter much trouble. And you have one of the best riders in the business to try and keep him out of harm's way in John Velasquez.
John Velasquez has finished first in the Kentucky Derby 4 times, 3 officially. This would be his 5th time finishing first, although only 4 will count.
Going to be a lot of love for Fierceness on Derby Day, but we all know with that huge crowd, We'll see what happens with the weather. If there's adversity, things bunch up. Anything can happen. We saw that with Rich Strike just a few years ago. Hope you enjoyed it. If you only caught the tail end of this, we're going to re-air the show several times before they break from the gate in the run for the Roses. Good luck on Derby Day. In the end, we just fingers crossed we have good weather and we have a great result on Saturday.
Can't wait. 150 years, a lot of history.
A lot of history, good safe trips for everybody.
All right, hope you enjoyed it. Hope you enjoy your Kentucky Derby Day as well. Don't forget, we're going to have live coverage from here in New York all afternoon Saturday, and keeping our eyes on the odds and who to play for the 150th edition of the Kentucky Derby. Fierceness going to be your favorite. We know that much. He has been special. Breeders' Cup Juvenile was outstanding. That earned him 2-year-old champion honors. And his final Derby prep, the best we've seen from anyone in this year's group. Sierra Leone, he'll try and bring Chad Brown his first ever Kentucky Derby win. A deep closer. He'll come from the back of the pack. He'll break from post 2. Who will take home America's most famous race on Saturday?
Down to the wire, Verstappen. Here's the finish, ancient roll.
War Bomber's won the King Edward.
SEAL Team has won the Twilight Derby.
Warfront, standing at Claiborne Farm.
Number 1 is Mo Donegal by Uncle Mo. And they're off in the Remsen. As they come on for the finish, and it's going to be tight here in the Remsen. Mo Donegal bearing down on the outside. It's Mo Donegal and early voting, and it is Mo Donegal to win the Wood Memorial. And it will be Mo Donegal to win the Test of the Champion, the Belmont Stakes.